everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and this time you made me watch Split Second, and this was requested this time on Patreon by Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham, who I accidentally attributed the last you made me watch to, so I want to apologize to him for that. That was Muppets Christmas Carol, which was actually asked for by Matthew McLean, so sorry to both of those guys. I just had it listed in my notes wrong. The bullet point was in a weird place. I had those right next to each other. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a very odd movie from 1992 starring Rutger Hauer as an action hero. Yeah, and I assume that's the reason that this was requested, because I think of myself as maybe not a Rutger Hauer fan, but just I'm very intrigued by his performances in things, and I want to be more of a fan of him. He is one of the few actors that I've considered going through his entire catalog, because I find his acting really unconventional, and there's just a really interesting affect about him that has always appealed to me. But I've usually, of course, I guess before now, only seen him in supporting roles and as villains in things, and I get the sense that the producers of this movie, this is something of a low-budget B-movie, came to him because of his performance in Blade Runner. I'd be really surprised if that weren't the case, and so this is sort of a star vehicle for Rutger Hauer. He's definitely the biggest name in this. I didn't recognize any other actors or actor names in this, maybe a couple of kind of background characters that I wondered, I think I've seen this guy in something maybe, but I couldn't put a name to the face or another property they were in. The only other person that I recognized from this was Kim Cattrall, who was Valeris in Star Trek VI, and she would have done that movie right before this, I think the very year before. And I imagine that these were shot real close to each other because she has the same hairstyle in this that she had in Star Trek VI, and it kind of works okay in this because it sort of just watches like maybe it's an odd futuristic fashion. I haven't gotten into the premise of this yet, but this is set in the far-flung future of 2008. That's right, apparently London is flooding the year that I get married. So this is, I can't even say that this is an environmental piece, but the world that this is set in, the background of it is kind of an environmental thing where, because of global warming and excessive rainfall, London is getting flooded. Not entirely, but there are a lot of sections where there's a lot of water, which is really kind of a neat aesthetic, and so you have a lot of cars, especially Jeeps, a lot of Jeeps in this movie, driving through a lot of shallow water all over the place. It's got kind of this, Venice feel, but it's set in the future, or at least the future, in 1992 it's set in the future, and it is derivative of lots of different things. At first I was thinking influenced, and then by the time I got to the end, it was feeling pretty derivative. It's difficult not to talk about this movie without just throwing a bunch of other titles at it. This is certainly looking really hard at RoboCop. It's looking really hard at Blade Runner, and it feels like a kind of lower budget version of some other kind of sci-fi satires that are happening at the time, but I would not classify this as a satire. It just kind of has the same aesthetic as some of those really over-the-top, exaggerated kind of cautionary tales of futures where we've really messed ourselves up, and it's kind of pseudo-dystopian. And so this looks and feels a little bit like movies like Demolition Man, and oddly, it's almost like a horror monster film version of the Super Mario Brothers movie. It's got a lot of that in it. The best way I can describe this is, like I said, it's hard not just throw a bunch of different titles at you, but it's because it's trying to be a whole bunch of different things at once, and I don't think ultimately it really quite works. But it's a like supernatural thriller that is kind of ostensibly a science fiction piece, but it's actually a paranormal investigating piece. And I'm going to spoil this a little bit. I don't really know how to talk about this without giving away some things about the ending, because I found it really kind of anticlimactic and a little bit counterintuitive, and it's hard to really give you my read on it without telling you the disappointing place that it goes to by the end. But the best way I can describe this is, plot-wise, it watches like what you might have used for the plot of a like sci-fi RPG on the Sega Genesis. It feels like that. So Rutger Hauer is a like burnout cop whose partner died 3 years earlier, and he's been kind of beating himself up for his partner's death, and not just because he blames himself for not stopping a serial killer, or what we initially think is a serial killer, from killing his partner, but because he was also sleeping around with the guy's wife. And it feels like the whole thing is going to be a kind of road to redemption thing for him, and then it doesn't end up going that way at all. Halfway through, I thought this was going to be, or maybe just past the halfway point, because I was really with it for the first half of this movie, may I say. Mostly because I was really taken in by the atmosphere of this, and by Rutger Hauer's, as always, really kind of out there and odd performance. He's doing all of the classic standard Rutger Hauer things. Real quick, I'll mention this because I don't know where else I would say it, but there's this weird moment where I can't remember what even the context is exactly, but he's after this monster. He's investigating this serial killer, who, I'll just go ahead and come out and say it. I don't know how many folks have actually seen this and who's really going to care, but I am going to spoil things with this. Like I said, the spoiler warning is there in the title. But the serial killer turns out to kind of be this weird big monster thing, which maybe isn't even telling you too much about it, because that's on the poster. But like, everything about this is so counterintuitive, but it's treated as a giant reveal when you get to the end, and you see it in shadow and silhouette a lot, even, past like the first 25-30 minutes. And so it seems like this big crazy hulking thing. Like, it's not a surprise that it's a monster, but then at the end it's kind of treated as a surprise, I guess, just because finally we get to see what it looks like. But the whole thing, I'm jumping around, the whole thing feels like it's leading to a big reveal, because it's a mystery. And at the end, the mystery is, it's this big monster thing. But anyway, as he is chasing this thing, there's this moment where he's got this one-liner that I wondered if it would kind of become like a repeated thing and his catchphrase or something, and it wasn't. But there's this part where he goes really dramatically, and like slightly sadistically, Rutger Hauer goes, "Having fun?" And that's what he says in Batman Begins, just before, when he's playing Mr. Earl, just before he fires Lucius Fox. And I was like, is that a callback to that? To this movie? To this, like, $7 million weird futuristic monster B movie? Or is that just a coincidence? And now I'm really wanting to watch more Rutger Hauer movies to see if that's a thing that he says a lot. I don't know. That was a really strange moment. But anyway, so he plays Stone. He plays Harley Stone. It's kind of revealed when we get his first name, where it's like, oh, he's got a girl's name. He's Harley Stone. And kind of a cliche ripoff of a lot of these kind of rough and tumble, Stone's real obvious name, a lot of these kind of rough and tumble 80s and 90s action heroes. He's got the leather jacket, he's got the belts everywhere, he carries big guns, he wears sunglasses, he doesn't like imagine Rutger Hauer playing Neo from The Matrix. He doesn't like authority. He really shouldn't be allowed on the Force. He's a loose cannon, and he's allowed to continue for no good reason. At the beginning of the movie, he's been he's been suspended but not fired, and nobody in the force likes him. His bosses don't like him. It doesn't make any sense that he's allowed to operate. He's a complete and utter liability, and the one reason I would think that you would keep him on the force is because he seems to have this kind of sixth sense about things. There's this mystery that I found pretty compelling at the beginning, and I could say that about everything about this movie. A lot of elements that I found really compelling at the beginning that totally lost me in the second half, where he seems to be a psychic, maybe, and he's got, it turns out, a psychic connection to the monster, but at first we think that maybe he's just got a superpower somehow. And I kind of ultimately sort of wished that that's what it was. Like, I kept seeing a potentially cool TV show in this, and then it turns out that it's just about this one, particular monster, and there's not really... I'll talk about the monster here in a little bit. There's not a real good reason that he's got this psychic link up. There's all these weird, random elements to this monster that we find out about, and none of them add up to anything particularly interesting, which is really disappointing. But anyway, so just everything about this guy is pretty run-of-the-mill and cliche. He smokes cigars all the time, and he's addicted to coffee, and he used to drink, but he's moved to coffee now, so he's obsessed with that. And I guess the other movie I should throw out that I just thought of that this is maybe however you want to look at it, homaging or ripping off a lot, is Escape from New York, and he's kind of that sort of character a little bit, except with maybe a little bit more humanity, question mark, maybe, or maybe more obvious humanity, I don't know, because it spends the first half hour working really hard to try to make this guy seem like unlikable, but in a fun sort of way, where he's not supposed to be conventionally sympathetic, but you're supposed to be able to read that maybe there's a heart of gold under there somewhere, and that he's just, like I said earlier, really burnt out and kind of lost himself, and maybe he'll find that again later. It becomes a real typical buddy cop thing, and the guy who's assigned with him, this whole thing, I think I said this earlier, but if I didn't, it takes place in London in 2008, and the guy that he's saddled with is real high-strung and posh and all of that, and he starts to loosen up the longer he's with Rutger Hauer's character. I will say that some of that seemed like a pretty natural evolution, and I was actually kind of enjoying those guys starting to appreciate each other, especially because of how extreme it starts, where Stone doesn't want anything to do with this guy to the point where he pretends like he's not there. It's not even that usual thing of, well, the chief said that we have to work together, so I guess I'll just deal with it, but I'm not going to be nice to you. He just won't even let the guy in the car. He's like, let's just both meet at the place where we have to go. And then even when he does it, do you have a car? Okay, let's just both drive there. And then when they do that, he still says, I'm not working with you. We're not partners. I don't want anything to do with you. And then eventually, the other guy, what's his name? Dick Durkin. He starts to, real creative names in this movie. He starts to kind of prove his mettle, and then these guys are getting along gradually, and then toward the end it goes real too far, and it gets to almost a sappy place, and Stone is, as he's showing a little bit more sentimentality, and he's getting a little bit more vulnerable. He's starting to get kind of out of character and turn into a different person, I think. It just goes too far the other way. There's this weird pendulum swing. So, anyway, let me actually also... And the other thing that's weird about Stone is, again, he feels really bad about his partner's death because he was cheating on his partner's wife. But then she ends up being kind of his love interest character, and he hasn't seen her in a long time. And when she shows up again in his apartment, he's got this really weird, crazy apartment, by the way, that's got, birds all in it, and he won't kill them for some reason. He says, I can't kill them. I don't know why, and like none of his windows open, and he basically looks like he's living in a like a warehouse space, and he's got like a real busted up looking fridge and kitchen, and it's some cool set design, but it's a very strange location, and he's obsessed with Harley Davidsons, I guess just because his first name is Harley. Okay. So anyway, she shows up, and I guess she's just there so that we can have a victim for the monster to mess with, and it creates some personal stakes for this guy. There's not any real great reason she's there. I mean, I only watched this once, but I kind of wondered. I guess I'm just not remembering why she's there in the first place. And anyway, so she weirdly makes him more and less sympathetic simultaneously, because we finally start to see a little bit of his vulnerability and humanity where he cares about another human being, and he's not just like trying to chase down the serial killer and swearing at everybody and pointing guns in people's faces all the time and being all macho. There's somebody that he cares about. But the problem is that at the same time, it's the person that's like kind of the reason he's like this in the first place, and that's not dealt with at all. And weirdly, they have some chemistry together. I actually like Kim Cattrall in this fine, but there's just this very strange disconnect between those two things, I think. So the big reveal with the monster, like I said, is that it's a monster. When we finally see it, it also is derivative of several different things. It kind of looks like, it's definitely looking at Alien real hard, but it's got sort of a Venom mouth, and this is 1992. Venom is pretty popular in the comics at this point. I don't know that we're actually looking at Venom in this movie, but it looks like Venom. It's the closest thing to that you get on screen for anything until Spider-Man 3, when we finally actually do Venom. And it's like, but it also looks a little bit like the Batman Who Laughs, because it's got that crazy smiley Venom face, but it has no eyes. And it's kind of a cool design, I suppose, but I really expected, and I guess this is going to come off like I'm complaining that the movie isn't doing the obvious thing, that it's not predictable, but the thing where I thought it was going was actually more interesting than what it ended up doing, and I was going to kind of call typical on this, but I at the end ended up kind of wishing this is what it had been. I thought it would turn out that the serial killer was actually his old partner all along, and that he had this like obsessive vendetta against him, and maybe it was even like using the MO of the serial killer who killed him or something, and somehow was able to make himself seem like a big monster thing, or had mutated for some reason or something. Because I was also looking for some kind of an angle with the environmental thing, and that never really happens. And a part of me wants to praise it for just having that be in the background and be the the kind of the trappings of this world, but because it's not really about very much than just the basic surface plot and a real typical character arc for this guy who gets the girl at the end, who's the woman that he was cheating with on his partner, and he is really good friends at the end with his partner. Like, it's you've seen this plot 1,000 times. There's not a lot of subtext underneath it. It's all pretty surface, and so because of the environmental thing, I mean, there's a lot of things that I could keep reading some kind of symbolism into that ultimately don't really culminate in anything. Like, there's rats running around everywhere because of all the flooding, and I'm like, okay, what is that going to ultimately end up having to do with the serial killer or monster or whatever it ends up having to, or ends up being? And like is it a thematic connection, or is there some kind of like actual literal connection with the rats? There wasn't any of that, and so it's just kind of dull and interesting at the end, and it's this really convoluted kind of occult monster where it's like carving pentagrams into people, and then that ends up just being a map to its hideout so we can get there. I don't know why it's doing that. It's like the movie can't decide if it's self-aware and planning and plotting things, or if it's just working on instinct. And by the time I get to the end of it, it doesn't seem like a smart monster, and it does seem like it's just operating on instinct, but it's doing all these things that you would think that you would need like more of a brain to do. And so it's obsessed with Stone, with our protagonist. I don't know why, just because he was there when it killed his partner. Like, okay, so like for 3 years it's been tracking this guy, and I don't actually know why it took this long for Stone to track him down either, because he's been obsessed with him, or with a serial killer for a long time, and the thing I guess has been operating, or did it lay low for a while? I'm really not sure. So maybe there's a little bit of a why now question. Maybe on a second viewing I wouldn't have that. I don't know. But at the moment I'm wondering, if they have that psychic connection, because at the beginning of the movie he shows up at a place where the monster slash serial killer is about to strike again, and he just misses him. And it's like, if this has been going on for as long as it has, it seems like at some point, but maybe the idea is supposed to be that he needed help, that you had to have this, buddy cop thing, this partner. He had to replace his partner, he had to move on. Maybe that's the idea. I'm not sure, before he could finally catch the monster. But he does a lot of the legwork. Like, this Durkin guy, certainly helps. But I don't know if I'm totally convinced that he actually needed him. But anyway, then there's this whole weird thing with DNA, where the monster keeps integrating his victim's DNA in it, and I suppose that's supposed to have something to do with the link, the telepathic link, but I don't know why else it's doing that. So that whole thing is very muddled and weird and doesn't culminate into anything. And I remember thinking at about the halfway point, or a little bit beyond, because it really lost me in the second half, they're going to have to really stick the landing here, or it's going to kind of hurt the rest of the movie. And that is what ends up happening, because I just kept guessing the whole time, what is this thing? And it ultimately isn't anything more than what we thought it was 20 minutes into the thing. So that's unfortunate. And then there's issues with kind of character motivations and their like personal basic logic and common sense. I don't know why on earth we keep going back to this guy's apartment. And it's weird. It's like we keep leaving and winding up back there over and over again. Almost like this is a really cheap movie and they just don't have a lot of sets, so they have to keep going back to this place. And I don't think it looks like a cheaply made movie, which is why at first I didn't understand why we kept doing that until I saw the budget. And I was like, oh, okay, so they didn't have a whole lot to work with, but like what is on screen looks pretty good to me, I think. And that also gives it, that low budget gives it a grit, kind of like the 1990 Ninja Turtles movie, that serves it really well, I think, because of this kind of, pseudo dystopia that, pardon me, I dropped something. It's kind of pseudo dystopia that we're looking at. But anyway, so the monster attacks at Stone's apartment, and this whole thing is real kind of wonky, where it just keeps doing things for no good reason. I don't understand them, where it shows up at his apartment when he's not there, and his girlfriend, who is his partner's ex-wife, is taking a shower, and you see a shadow that's like the monster behind her, and it's supposed to be like really tense, and it's the horror thing, and she's gonna get killed, right? And then you hear a scream, and we can try this dumb thing where she just screams because like the water got cold for a minute, and she didn't actually get attacked because the monster was in there, but then it left, and then it killed a woman in another apartment in the same building for some reason. I don't really understand why. And then Stone just keeps living there, and keeps letting her go there. Well, I guess later she shows back up there and he wasn't expecting her to be there, but she's just like, I didn't think you'd mind. And I'm like, why on earth would you go back there? And then that's where she gets kidnapped. So I'm like, everybody's dumb in this movie. Like, why do they keep going back to this place? And then the Durkin character just becomes more of a cartoon character as the thing goes along, where he I like the idea of his maybe starting to descend into madness a little bit, where he can't, he thinks he has everything figured out. He went to college for investigating and stuff, to become a detective, and he's really scholarly and book smart, but he's maybe not that streetwise, and he's really idealistic and thinks he has everything figured out, but he's got a lot of learning and growing up to do, and the world hasn't become real for him yet. And so when he comes up against the monster. And it's weird because there's a part where you think he's died, and I don't know that even with body armor I buy that he survives this attack that happens where he gets shot a bunch of times. And I don't know, did the monster pick up guns? I'm confused about that. Again, I only saw this once, so I could be off on some of this stuff. But he falls out a window, and I don't know how he survived the fall, and I'm confused. I think he went out a window. I'm confused about that whole thing. But it's weird because it's going up against the monster later that starts to drive him over the edge. It's not even a near-death experience. He was just like, yeah, I have body armor. What'd you expect? I'm fine. And then later, in the Stone's apartment, because in the last half of this movie, we're just there constantly, he sees the monster when Stone doesn't. And we don't either. Again, that's a reveal later on when they're in the sewer at the end. And he's like, oh man, there's this monster, and I can't get my mind around it. It was freaky. And then he just keeps talking about needing guns. And he's like, we gotta track this thing down, and we need big effing guns. And he says that 100 times. He just keeps saying big effing guns. And this movie is, I think, maybe a little bit unintentionally funny in places. I can't always tell when it's supposed to be comedic and when it's not. And there's scenes that go on too long with just people repeating themselves and doing things that are really weird and goofy, and I just can't decide if it's supposed to be funny. A lot of kind of counterintuitive performances, and as he gets weirder and crazier, he starts to remind me of that sidekick guy from Howard the Duck, who I was never able to pin down and figure out what he was really supposed to be. And like I said, he's just kind of a nutso cartoon character by the end. What else do I have to say about this? I don't know. It gets really long in the tooth toward the end. This movie is only an hour and a half long, and it feels longer. It feels like at least a 2-hour movie to me, and I started to look at my watch and get pretty bored with it in the last 25 minutes or so, especially. And like I said, I was just really disappointed with that ending. So I have to say, not feeling it. This has apparently become something of a cult classic because it's so odd, and I think a lot of people see it as that kind of so bad it's good thing, and I see it as kind of Rutger Hauer's Return of Captain Invincible. It's that level of B-movie where it's maybe a little bit better production-wise and even acting-wise than your average B-movie, but it is ultra flawed and really uneven and has massive pacing problems and is very perplexing and kind of all over the place, and at least on a first viewing, I don't understand a lot of it. Unlike Captain Invincible, I don't suspect that watching it multiple times will help that. But I don't know, and I may sit through this again at some point just because I found Rutger Hauer himself pretty amusing. There's a couple people that I could see showing this to. I think Eric would enjoy things about this movie. This is kind of his kind of protagonist, I think. But it's definitely got a really, really weak last half. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed my kind of haphazard review of Split Second. By the way, I have no idea why it's called that. I racked my brain trying to figure that out. Is it because your life can change in a split second like his does when his partner gets killed? I don't know. It's a really generic title for a really derivative kind of movie. Anyway, if you would like to make me watch something or read a comic for review, you can join the $15 tier on Patreon. That's patreon.com/geekvolution. And you can join it just for 1 month and get a request on the list, or you can stay there in the rotation and I will get something out for you at the moment, it's going to be about 3 months. We have quite a few people on that tier, and I'm doing one of these a week. So that's how that works. And anyway, in the meantime, thanks a bunch for watching. Sure appreciate it. I was Captain Logan, and I'll see you again real shortly for more stuff here on Geekvolution. Bye, folks.